Welcome to California, Mr. Bond.
Hello, hello. Here we are.
Hey everybody.
Hello.
So we have a really cool guest today with us. A lot of you may know him, and I know that many of us are familiar with something that he started. It's Michael VanBlaricum, Fleming Authority and founder of the Ian Fleming Foundation. Michael, thank you for
Yay.
being with us today.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Looking forward to it.
Yes. So why don't we just dive right into it? Because there's a lot to cover. Because your history in Bond is very extensive.
Yeah.
So if people might not be familiar with you, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your upbringing?
Sure. I'm born and raised and educated in the state of Illinois. Grew up in small towns in Illinois. The last several years lived in Princeton, Illinois, which is a town of about 6,000 people, and we had one little theater that occasionally played movies. I'm After graduating high school, I went to the University of Illinois for 7 years. Got my bachelor's, and PhD in electrical engineering, and then made a beeline to Santa Barbara, and I've now lived in this house for 49 and a half years. Um, we spent summers, my wife and I spent summers while we were in graduate school working at Lawrence Livermore Lab up in Livermore, California. My wife's also an engineer, so anyhow, that's sort of the life up to the time I started collecting it in a nutshell. I'm a research engineer. Spend a lot of time doing research, especially in electromagnetics, which includes antennas, radar,
Hmm.
stealth, all those kind of fun things, um, communications. Uh, so
All right. Um,
What was when was the first time James Bond caught your eye? Was it through Fleming's novels or was it the movies?
no, it was the movies. It would have been January of '65 when Goldfinger opened in the States. I think it was January. Um, I was 14. Went to see Goldfinger, as did everybody else in the United States, I think, that weekend. Um, I remember it vividly. I mean, it was the first Bond film I saw. My parents went, it was a Friday night. My parents went on Thursday night. They said they wanted to screen it to make sure it was okay for me to go see it. In actuality, now having raised children of my own, I realized what they were doing. That was their excuse to go see a Bond film without being embarrassed about it. But I remember it because there were a bunch of us all we were all, I think, freshmen in high school at the time. And I remember the name of the girl that sat directly in front of me. So it was fairly vivid memory. So that was really my introduction. I didn't start reading Fleming until I was in my early 30s, mostly because I was focused on technical subjects. And so I didn't really read literature, to be honest with you.
why do you think it is that like I got into Bond at around 13 and Steve as well, right? You were also like early teens?
I was my when I was 5, my dad took me to see
5.
Octopussy,
Well, there you go. Okay, well, there you go. Um,
and I had gotten a little trouble for that. And then,
yeah.
but yeah, like around like 10 years old was when I really dove into,
You know,
excuse me, dove into it.
what do you think it is about Bond and the early teens that grabs people, grabs young boys, I guess.
Um, well, girls, cars, fast everything. It's hard to answer that from my perspective again, because I was already pretty, by the time you're 14, you're pretty focused on what you're focused on,
Mhm.
which is getting through high school. But so I didn't really get over the top. I've met gobs and gobs of people, sort of like you guys, who are a lot younger than I am. So the Bond craze, while the film was strong, the Bond craze in 1964, it was just really getting started. So people weren't going out and buying stuff and all that sort of thing. I mean, I certainly couldn't wait till the next movie came out the following year. That's true. But I think it's just the obvious.
Hmm.
Again, the girls, the vehicles, the suave, debonair person that we all wanted to grow up to be.
Yeah, that's a pretty perfect answer there. Okay, so you were primarily into the movies. Now, did that play a part in your interest in your job in technical science, or were they totally separate things for you?
Um, those are totally separate,
Hmm.
actually. And I'll get to an interesting point later that sort of tie the two together. But
Hmm.
um, no, they were separate. I think by the time I was 14, actually by the time I was little, probably 8 or 9, I had a laboratory in the basement, trying to burn the house down on multiple occasions. I had a dark room, I had a laboratory. My brother was a ham radio operator, so we had electronics all over the
That's
basement.
cool.
So I was always focused on science and engineering, if you will.
Hmm.
And so the science side, the Q side of Fleming's movies were pretty interesting to me.
What where do you think that came from for you? Like, what was your first interest with that? Was it your what you just said, or was there something else? Or were you grabbed by it as a young kid, like tech, like that form of stuff?
I yeah, well, I think the technical side was certainly pretty cool, but I think it was just the all-encompassing everything that was going on. And the fact that Goldfinger took place partially in the United States
Mm.
certainly helped. I think the fact that you're seeing sort of the way that, the reason the Brits got so hooked on Fleming early on in the 50s was that he showed the whole world and the high class part of the whole world that people coming out of the war weren't seeing. And even in a small farm town in Illinois, you really weren't privy to much other than cornfields. So, seeing all this stuff and seeing parts of the world, seeing the DB5 chase in Europe, and then seeing what was going on even in over in Kentucky was pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah.
I always like to say to myself whenever I throw a Bond movie on, I'll go, all right, let's do You Only Live Twice. We'll go to Japan today. You know, it's
Right,
like little
It's a
vacations for the
travelogue.
mind, you know.
right. I agree. I think I remember when I first read You Only Live Twice and saw the movie that basically it was a travelogue. I mean, I was just
Hmm.
intrigued by what I was seeing because it's not something, again, going back to the 60s, you weren't seeing those sorts of things. We weren't privy to it. We didn't have the internet sitting there, at our
Yeah.
fingertips.
Yeah.
So,
Even the early Bond films, especially like if you watch, Dr. No and From Russia with Love back to back, they basically have similar airport sequences when he arrives in Jamaica and then arrives in Istanbul. And that was, because audiences at that time, they weren't traveling by air as much. That was still kind of a rare thing. So they really wanted to show, the tower, the plane landing, going through the gate, and like, oh, this is what it's like, folks.
exactly, exactly. I gotta say, because since I sort of know what the questions are that are coming, I don't think I would touch on this, but you just mentioned Istanbul. For my 74th birthday, I'd always wanted to go to Istanbul.
Mm.
So for my 74th birthday, we were on a cruise that was going to stop at Istanbul. And so I was pretty excited, getting to see all the Bond locations. But what I really wanted to do, and I've always wanted to do it since I was little for some reason, which sort of contradicts what I said earlier. I think there was an element of a spy in me as a child. I always wanted to run across the rooftops of Istanbul, and we had Get Smart and I Spy and Mission Impossible, all those shows showing as a teenager. And one of the colleagues that I work with's family is from Turkey, And I mentioned to him, I said, when I get to Istanbul, I'm going to run across the rooftops of Istanbul. And he laughed at me. And about 4 hours later, he called me and said, "Hey, Mike, I figured out how you can do it." And so making a few phone calls, and on my 74th birthday, I ran across the rooftops of the Grand Bazaar
That's a good
in
birthday.
Oh,
Istanbul.
wow, that's
Wow.
great.
And it turned out, and I didn't know this was going to happen, but it turned out it's the exact spot where Daniel Craig was riding his motorcycle.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
And
cool.
even up to the window that he goes through and everything. It was,
Nice.
that was just sheer dumb
Oh,
luck, so it was a double whammy. I got to run across the rooftops and I got to be on the exact spot that they filmed. And in fact, they tore down the roof of the Grand Bazaar, which is huge, had all new tile on it. And what
Hmm.
happened was apparently the tile on the roof hadn't been changed for years and years and years. One, the motorcycles from the movie tore up the roof a little bit, but when the city fathers saw the rooftop, how bad shape it was, they said, "Oh, we can't have this," and completely put a new one in. Now they have a rule: there's no motorcycle riding on the roofs of the Grand Bazaar, and so anyhow, it was sort of funny.
Yeah, it's not something someone does every day. So,
Right, right.
that's pretty cool though. So you had mentioned
yeah.
okay, so you got into Fleming in your 30s. Now, I know the books had gone out of print uh in the 70s. Why do you think that was?
I think a combination of things.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I'll just point out right now, if you go into the bookstore, at least I go into bookstores in Santa Barbara, I can't find, or as I travel, I can't find Fleming books sitting on the shelf in the United States. You can in any bookstore in England, you can find them, but I can't find them here. So I don't think there was a huge demand. I think the world was focused on other things at the time, and I think there was the whole counterculture thing was going on. I don't think it was sort of as cool as it had been at the time. So the books, if you wanted to read Fleming, I had to go to used bookstores to find them at the time. Um,
What
I've I've never dug into did they actually totally go out of print in the United States or not. I think they must have because I remember asking at a bookstore, "Do you have any Fleming?" And they said they were out of print. But I haven't gone back into volumes of book and print to see whether that's true or not.
what was the spark that made you want, because you had been a fan of the movies before, but what made you want to dive into the novels
Yeah,
at that point?
I think alluded to this earlier. When I turned 30, I started reading, finally, uh, reading literature, not technical volumes. And I really wanted to be a writer. I wanted to learn to write. So I started taking writing classes as well. And so I decided, okay, if I'm going to read, I'm going to start with Fleming. I've never read the books and finally gathered them and read them all and was captivated by the writing style as well as the stories that he was telling. And I have the collector's gene. So, once I started buying them and collecting them, then trying to get them all together was um, not easy. In fact, I started off just trying to get the paperbacks, like most of us do. Um, my wife was about to go to New York City to visit relatives, and I asked her to go into the mystery or to go see if she could find a few more books. She ended up in the Mysterious Bookshop in New York, and Otto Penzler sold her three first edition Flemings for $35 total.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Pretty good.
And
That's that's a
the
bargain.
yeah, it was. And the You Only Live Twice copy was Sammy Davis Jr.'s copy.
Nice.
So that kind of sparked, I thought, okay, these are really cool. I want now to get all the first British editions, and it just sort of went from there as far as collecting goes. But I was still reading them at the time.
So
What
do
was
you
the
have those?
first
So,
Fleming book that you read? The first Bond book?
It was probably Casino Royale.
Yeah, you went in order?
I believe so. Yes.
yeah, I did that at a young age. I'd read a book and watch the film, and I would go back and forth with
Mhm.
that. So do you have those books still, like, so the ones you bought then?
I've got, I think I kept the You Only Live Twice.
Okay.
Most of those books, as I think I'm donating my
Yeah.
entire collection to the Rare Book and Manuscript Library at the
Yeah.
University of Illinois. But I think I probably kept the You Only Live Twice copy because it was just cool, and it was what I call the first one.
Yeah.
And I had a duplicate. You Only Live Twice. First editions, You Only Live Twice are fairly easy to find, relatively easy to find.
Hmm.
In 1980, they were, in the early 80s, they were really easy to find. In fact, you could walk into a store and find stacks of Man with the Golden Gun, first editions.
Hmm.
Um, that brings up a story. Sorry to keep going off
No,
on
no,
tales,
you
No,
but
please
no,
talk,
no.
talk, talk. No, no, it's all good.
when my girls were little, we went down to Disney. We wanted to go to Orlando to go to Disney World, and we got in early. So I said, let's go to a bookstore. So there was a used bookstore we went into, and he had several copies of Man with the Golden Gun. And I started ripping the covers off, looking for the golden gun that's embossed on the
Hmm.
boards, which is very rare. I mean, there's only a few of them out there. And lo and behold, I found one.
Wow.
And I wrapped that cover back on, walked up. It was $15. Uh, and the guy knew me because I was selling books at the time, so I was somewhat known, and of course, I'd get a dealer discount. And he said, "Why are you buying these? These are a dime a dozen. You can find them anywhere." And I said, "I need something to read on the way home." I couldn't tell him that
Yeah.
he just sold me a $5,000 book for $15. I just
Yeah, he would
couldn't do
jack up
it.
the price at that point, I'm sure. So,
Right.
Yeah. What
well,
was when you first read Fleming? Because I was in high school when I started to get into Fleming, and I read them out of order. I think I read Thunderball first, and then From Russia with Love, and then I had You Only Live Twice, and that book was the one where I went, "Whoa, this is really different."
Mhm.
And was there anything, since you had known the movies before reading the books, what was it about the books that struck you as being the most different from the cinematic Bond?
Um, well, first of all, I don't. There aren't a lot of gadgets in the books,
mhm,
as you know.
Yeah,
Um, the sex and violence that's in the movies is not in the books. I think a lot of I don't know whether we're going to touch on this or not, but a lot of the bias toward Fleming early on, you know, um, is the fact that people are judging the Fleming books by the movies.
mhm,
And so the people that worry about misogyny and racial prejudice and all those things, which are things you should worry about,
mhm,
uh, are where they think the Bond films are maybe over the top, just assume that the books are the same way, and the
mhm.
books really aren't.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the thing that really attracted me to the books was how tight the writing was.
Mhm.
He tells his stories in 200 pages. Pick up a thriller now; those are 400, 500 pages. I've met many thriller writers, and I asked them. I said, "Why do you insist on writing 400 or 500 word, 400 to 500 page books?" And they said, "Well, it's because that's what the publishers want. People feel if they're going to pay $20 to $30 for a book, they want a thick one." Whereas, Fleming could tell an incredible tale in 200 pages with no sweat at all.
yeah,
I find that just fascinating to me. Also, his ability to describe a scene and bring music in. I actually have, um, the beginning of the chapter of La Vie en Rose, the chapter La Vie en Rose in Casino Royale. I don't know if you've read it recently, but the nightclub was small and dark, lit only by candles in gilded candelabra, whose warm light was repeated in wall mirrors set in more gold picture frames. The walls were covered in dark red satin, and the chairs and banquettes in matching red plush. In the far corner, a trio consisting of a piano, electric guitar, and drums was playing La Vie en Rose with muted sweetness. Seduction dripped on the quietly throbbing air, it seemed to Bond that every couple must be touching with passion under the tables. Now that's good writing.
Yes, it is.
And it's just,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
I
very
mean,
and
descriptive.
you
just
can
enough. It's
hear
not
La
too
Vie.
much description either.
Yeah. I mean, he did that in a paragraph, and he got, you know, everything. You can hear the music playing in the background. You can see that band playing. I think there's another scene, and I didn't pull it down, but in Live and Let Die, when he walks into the club in Harlem and he starts describing what's going on in the club and the dancing that's taking place and the music that's playing. Again, should be pretty easy to write a screenplay to that one. I mean, it's you can really see it,
Mm.
uh, even if you haven't seen the movies and everything. And I read that scene long before I ever saw the movies. So um,
Why do you think it is he doesn't sometimes get the respect he deserves? Do you think it's because of the movies, or what do
I
you,
think it's the movies. I think it
yeah,
goes back to what I was saying
yeah.
earlier, is I think people see the movies and say, well, that's just sex and violence and all those things. That's, that's not can't possibly be like that. I mean, must be like that in the books, and
Mm.
it's not. When I was selling rare books, I had a lady call once and she asked me what I was selling, and I said I sell mystery and detective fiction and Ian Fleming and Bondiana. And she said, "Oh, I thought you sold literature." And I said,
What?
and at that point
You're
we
like,
hung
and
up.
goodbye. Yeah, I was gonna say, and goodbye.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
We talked about this with Raymond Benson at our Majesty's screening in January about how, um, as opposed to Bond in the movies, where over the course of the franchise, even from Sean Connery early on, he could be, pretty flippant, and he's got the quips and the one-liners, and then but Bond's not really like that a whole lot in the books, and even Raymond had said he's a total hopeless romantic.
Uh,
His heart is easily broken, the
that's
literary
true.
Bond.
And if you read, and I'm blanking on which book it is, but the books start off sometimes he's coming home from a job and he's morose. I
yeah,
mean, he's just really down. And and that's Fleming. I mean, you know, it's Fleming's nature coming through in those things. He sees, I think he was probably, I had very large ups and very deep downs in his own personal emotions and life. And you don't really see that in the movies.
yeah,
He's usually, well, with the exception of like Craig's
yeah. Craig, as I say.
Bond, all the other Bonds tend to be having a really good time.
I mean, Timothy Dalton touches on that darkness.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he
no,
he's the
that's
only
true.
one who in the classic era that went, pretty serious. And just like even Dalton said, I just went right back to Fleming.
Yeah.
Right. And Fleming wrote the introduction to a book called Seven Deadly Sins. And in that introduction, he points out that he thinks there's an eighth deadly sin, and that's that of being a bore. But once I went through and counted, and I think he uses the word ennui uh, 6 or 7 times in the books, and it's not a common word that gets
Mm.
used, but it's basically, but that's I think what we're talking about is Bond tended toward ennui, if you will, and
Yeah,
was really afraid of being boring, but
yeah. There's also one of the books, I forget which one it is, where it begins with him at a desk in between jobs, just being
Oh, I think it's
bored.
Moonraker,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah, it is Moonraker, and then
Yeah,
he's just
he's
going
complaining
through
about Mondays
paperwork.
and stuff.
Yeah, he's just going through paperwork and stuff. So,
right,
which wouldn't be in the films, I don't think. So,
right.
No.
you know.
Or
Um,
in one of the books, he has night duty. He's
oh
not
yeah,
out on a field assignment, and he has to answer phones. Like he has to
Right,
be in the office overnight.
exactly.
yeah. I don't think you could. Well, you could put that in the films, but it would be not as much fun. So,
Yeah.
Right.
so, um, how do you feel his writing style is completely unique compared to other authors?
I think it's probably what we just touched
Yeah.
on, the fact that he can write so
Mm-hmm.
tightly, yet get all the emotions in.
Mm-hmm.
They say that, you try to get all five senses in when you're writing, and I
Yeah.
think he's really good about that.
Mhm.
If there's something that smells, he lets you know about it. And,
Yeah.
I mean, that chapter or that paragraph I just wrote,
Yeah.
read you, had probably almost all five of those senses in
Yeah.
it. The perfume, the smells, the music, the feeling, the touching,
Yeah.
yeah,
In your
I always
research,
want to drink when I read Fleming
well,
too.
yeah, well,
It's
there you go. I don't think you're the only one. So there you
it
yeah.
gets me thirsty.
go. In your research of him, is there anything that surprised you that you didn't know at the time?
My research of Fleming.
Yeah. Just when you began diving into it, did you have like a preconceived notion of him that was proven wrong or anything that might have surprised you?
Yeah, I think part of it was, again, I was doing this and starting to meet the family in the 80s.
Mhm.
So I started to learn how deep in the intelligence world that he actually really was. And I think that kind of surprised me. I think you don't necessarily, you think, oh, maybe he was just somebody that was just working like everybody else was for
Mhm.
the War Department during that time. But you start gradually start seeing how deep he really was into it and the things he was doing. And of course, that as the Official Secrets Act became more and more open, uh, now people are writing about all those things. Like he would go to Bletchley Park once a week
Mhm.
because he was the liaison, if you think about it, between Bletchley and Naval Intelligence. And of course,
Mhm.
Bletchley was trying to keep submarines from sinking their ships. So, it was something that was really important for him. But lots of stuff like that was, and how in his real life, how creative he was. Um, Almost fantasy creative, but in some cases, but it was the creativity, I think, that was important. So,
So you met the family. Can you take us back how that began, how you got introduced to them?
sure. Um, in 1984, I had to go to I was sent to a NATO conference in England, in London, at Lancashire House, which sits right next to St. James Palace. And I had never been to England before, so I was pretty excited by the whole opportunity. I went over a week early, and I had sent a letter to Peter Johnson Smith, who was head of Glidrose, and of course Ian Fleming's literary agent, and then became head of Glidrose, saying, I'm a collector. I'm working on a bibliography. I'd really like to meet you. And the response I got back was, call me when you get into town. So I stayed at the Mayfair Hotel, right in Mayfair, and called him when I got in, and he said, "Oh, I'm on my way to Frankfurt, but on the way to the airport, I'll stop by. Meet me, I'll meet you in the lobby." So he met me for about 15 minutes in the lobby, and clearly what he was doing was, here's this kid from California calling up saying, "Hey, I'm a Bond geek. Can I talk to you?" So he's clearly screening me. Um, and then he left. Later that afternoon, I got a phone call from his secretary saying, "Can you come over to the offices on Monday? We'd like to spend the day with you." And so I said, of course, I said, "Sure, I'll be there." So I spent the whole day at the Glidrose offices with
Wow.
Peter Jansen Smith and
Mm.
Nicholas Fleming, who was at the time the head of the estate, the Fleming estate. So I met Nicol, and there was the three of us, and it was surreal. It turns out at that time in England, and it may still be true, that if you can't take somebody to lunch, and that can't be a tax deduction, but you can, if you bring lunch in, it can be.
Okay.
So we had lunch in there in Glidrose, and this lady dressed like a French maid served our food, and then we had tea, and then later in the day she brought tea, and it was just this whole British over the top kind of thing that I, as a kid from Illinois, was just not used to. But we really hit it off. I mean, I really liked Peter. I really liked Nickel. And it turned out they were asking me more questions than I could ask them because, I had actually dug in fairly deep into a lot of stuff. And I would point something out. I say, were you aware of this? And they said, no, we're not. And, it was something that they were in charge of. So it was really fun. And that ultimately led, those connections led to everything else that ultimately happened.
What was the, were they looking at you for future projects, or what was the reason what they wanted to speak with you? Just wanted to know
I
more.
think they were just intrigued by
Mm,
somebody that had spent that much time
yeah.
collecting and digging into the stuff. Why they and I think once we hit it off, we just had fun together, and so why not?
Yeah.
But I don't know. They weren't looking for anything in particular other than being entertained by a young, naive American, I think, who was into their stuff. Um,
That sounds like a fun day.
it
It
was an
Yeah.
incredible day.
sounds kind of nerve-wracking too at the same time, but
It,
fun.
it was because at the time their offices, as I recall, their offices were down by St. Paul's Cathedral, and
Mm.
I sort of remember being able to look out the window and seeing St. Paul's Cathedral right
Oh,
there.
wow.
And it was nerve-wracking, because I was out of my depth, big time, but we had a good time.
Um,
When did you start thinking about doing something like the Ian Fleming Foundation? Was that something you'd always wanted to do, or was it something you kind of fell into, or
I think falling into is the right answer. What happened was, both, I was selling books, I was collecting books. People, book dealers around the world knew about me. And I had been introduced to people at Eon Productions via several different ways. One of the people that I met on that first meeting with Nickel Fleming and Peter Jensen Smith was I'll get it in a minute. John Parkinson. John Parkinson eventually went from Glidrose to Eon, and through John Parkinson, I met people at Eon. Anyhow, one day I was sitting in my office at work and I got a call from Saul Cooper, who worked for Warfield, who was sort of the production or the publicist, and he said, "Hey, Mike, you want to buy a submarine?" I mean, literally. I mean, I picked up the
oh,
phone.
sure.
"Hi, Mike, it's Saul. You want to buy a submarine?" Um, I said, Saul, I collect books. I said, tell me more. And he said, well, we have this 23-foot submarine called Neptune that was in Fiore's only,
Mm.
and it's sitting on the aircraft carrier, the Intrepid aircraft carrier in New York Harbor right now, and they don't want it anymore. It got left there, after doing some publicity. And if you don't buy it, there's a dive club in New York that's going to buy it and sink it and dive on it. And
Ah.
I said, let me get back to you. I have an idea. So I hung up. I called John Cork. I called Doug Redenius. And I said, I got an idea. Why don't we start a 501c3 nonprofit corporation that is dedicated to the preservation of Ian Fleming's legacy? And then, we can put our money together. We'll buy the submarine. We can restore the submarine and see where it goes from there.
Wow.
And so we did all that. I contacted a lawyer. We incorporated as a California corporation. Again, focused on the legacy of preserving the legacy of Ian Fleming. And because we all met in New York, got the submarine. He took it to his home in Momence at the time, Illinois. He restored it, and then it made People magazine.
Mm.
And then people started offering us stuff, and it just kept growing. In fact, because I think because of the People magazine article, we got a call from Reed Enterprises, who put on U.S. car shows
Mhm.
around the country, and they said we want to do. This would have been 92-ish time frame. We want to do James Bond themed car shows. It's all the new car shows they put on in all the major cities, but they said we wanted to have something for PR. Do you have anything besides the submarine? And we said no. And they said, do you know where they are, where things are? And we, as the foundation, said yes, but we're not going to tell you. And they said, how about we buy them, we restore them, and when the show's over, we give them to the foundation.
Oh, that's a good deal.
And we said, deal. And so that we got picked up several more items, including the two Lotuses in the process, and did those car shows. And that's all that just kept attracting attention. And Doug Rodinus was extremely good at knowing where all the bodies were buried, or car bodies, if you will. And through contacts and everything, was able to collect all that kind of stuff. But the whole time, we also wanted to keep more into the Fleming side. And it was hard when you suddenly got 40 vehicles, and people want to put museum shows on. It's hard to convince them that they should take a part of that show and dedicate it to the books and to Fleming.
Hmm.
And so, anyhow, that's how it came about. That
Um,
was, go ahead.
no, no. I live by the car museum in Los Angeles, so
Peterson, right?
yeah. So I got to go to that. And Steve, you saw that in Washington, right? You saw it
Yeah,
there?
yeah, I saw it at the Spy Museum.
Yeah, both. That was an amazing show. Because up to that point, I had seen some of the cars in some museums or some little things, but I hadn't seen them all in one spot. So my wife saw me cry slightly, so I was just sort of like amazed what you guys put up. That was a wonderful show. So
Yeah, the Peterson show,
yeah,
that was probably the most spectacular show I've ever seen.
yeah.
Certainly in the States. There was one in Brussels,
Uh,
excuse me, that was pretty much equivalent. But one of the things that was nice about the Peterson show, of course, was that at every vehicle
mhm,
they were running a loop of the scene that
yeah,
vehicle was in, and then they had printed background story. So the whole thing was just extremely well done. Uh,
yeah. My
When
my
I
wife was
saw it at
actually
the Spy Museum,
uh,
our friend Christian, who's one of the founding members of Capital Royale and one of the Spy-Fi guys, the podcast,
mhm.
he hooked my brother and I up with tickets to the show, and just worked out this way because when my brother and I were in the Bond in Motion exhibit, we stayed in there for like 2 hours, and there wasn't anybody in there. It was just us. And we took pictures of us just literally by ourselves amongst all these amazing vehicles. It was pretty great.
Right.
I was literally in heaven.
my
Yeah, it's
son.
fun. When they had this show in, it was in the London Film Museum for several years, actually. And when I went over to the Spectre premiere,
Mhm.
um, I took my daughters with me, who are now grown women, with families of their own. And we were walking around together, the three of us, looking at the vehicles, and every once in a while they would revert back because we stored at one time. My mother-in-law lived next door to us here in Santa Barbara, and we had the two Lotuses, the restored one and an unrestored one. We had the tow sled, the wet bike, and Blofeld's escape sub all sitting in my mother-in-law's garage.
That's great.
And so the girls could go down there and look at them. We'd open up and clean them once in a while, and people would walk past and be thunderstruck. But my daughters were walking through and said, "Dad, can we climb on it again like we used to in Grandma's house?" People were, you
You're
know.
like, maybe not.
I said, "No, we probably should stay behind these stanchions here. That's not a good idea."
How proud of, I mean, you must be really proud of the work you've done with the foundation. Is there one pinch me moment that you've had while working with them where you were like, wow, I can't believe that I accomplished this?
Um, yeah, it wasn't me accomplishing anything, but the pinch me moment was when they put the blue plaque up on Fleming's house on Ebury Street in London. I don't know if you've ever seen it or not, but
No, no.
for people that who have famous people after they have to be dead for like
Yeah, they have
30
the
years or
plaques.
something, and they can put a blue plaque up at a place they lived, and it talks about them. Well, the family contacted me and said, we're gonna have a ceremony to dedicate the blue plaque, and we'd like to invite you over. So I went over. I had dinner the night before um, with, I think it was Lucy Fleming, and or it may have been Kate. It's been a long time ago. And they said, "Oh, by the way, would you give the speech at the ceremony tomorrow?"
You're like, what?
I thought, uh, I'm not really good at impromptu speech giving. I said, but sure, I'm not going to turn it down. It turned out my daughter and I, who was 11 at the time, were there. And we were pretty much the only Americans in the crowd. Most of the people there were Fleming's family and things like that. But the pinch me moment came when they said, not only would you give the speech, but would Desmond Llewellyn is going to pull the cords to unveil the blue plaque.
Oh,
Would you
wow.
please introduce Desmond? And I said, certainly. And they told me that at the ceremony. And so it's like, okay, how do I introduce Desmond Llewellyn? So I was up there. I said, well, um, I really don't need this gentleman doesn't need an introduction, but I have to say, as president of the Ian Fleming Foundation, everybody says, did you want to be James Bond when you grew up? And I said, no, I wanted to be Q, and pointed to him. And but yeah, that was sort of weird. I mean, again, all of Fleming's family was there. Peter Jensen Smith, right before I went up to give the talk, Peter Jensen Smith was introducing me to people, and he introduced me to somebody. He said, "This is Sir So and So." I don't remember his name at all. And afterwards, I said, "You introduced me to a guy whose name was Sir Da Da Da." And I said, "Who is he?" He said, "Oh, that's the Queen's attorney." So that was the kind of audience that I said, and I find this out before I have to go up and be the only American speaking to a bunch of Brits who already knew all the answers to why we were dedicating this house. So that was probably the most pinch me moment. But there was another one where John Cork and I went into Churchill's war rooms, his cabinet war rooms. And we were with a lady who was Joan Bright Astley is the lady. She had worked in the war rooms. In fact, she was sort of keeping track of the espionage agents. And the executive director of the war rooms met us at the door because he really wanted to meet this lady. She was 93 at the time. When we went into the war rooms, he would, the war rooms were just exactly the way they were when the war was over. They preserved them, but now they had this 3/4 to inch plexiglass around each one. And he would unlock them and we would go inside. Well, there's people out there looking in and stuff, but she's standing inside telling John and I and the director stories about what went on in those rooms.
Wow.
And then afterwards, we said, Joan, do you want to go to lunch? And I think John Cork said, I know an Italian restaurant around here that'd be really good. And she says, no, I know a pub. We went about a block south of the war rooms, went into a pub that was underground. And she was telling stories, and I said, Joan, I get the feeling you've been here a lot. And she said, well, you notice it's underground. She said, during the war, um, I would come here with Fleming after work, and we'd have drinks, and then we'd go to the movies together. And so it's like, wow, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
This is the same lady she set up all like the Ottawa conference and all the conferences that were with Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt. And she told me she said when I was at, I forget which conferences, maybe the Alta conference, she said, Churchill introduced me to Joseph Stalin, but I refused to shake his hand.
Mm.
Now think about degrees of separation right there. This is a woman who dated Ian Fleming, and she's telling you that Churchill introduced her to Stalin and refused to shake Stalin's hand. Now that's history.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And so that's, the big pinch me moment of the whole Ian Fleming Foundation thing is getting to meet people who lived this history
Mhm.
and knew the history and could relate it to all I can do is read about it or watch movies about it. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, those are definitely pinch
Incredible.
me's. Yeah, you
Right.
can't. Yeah, you can't beat those.
I had breakfast with Moneypenny one,
Ah,
Lois Maxwell once
well, there you
too,
go.
which is and was drinking one night in a bar with um, Desmond Llewellyn.
Oh
And now
Wow.
I got to tell this story because it shows how stupid I am.
well.
I was at a conference at Pinewood Studios, and I was at a bar with John Steers, who did all the the
Yeah.
special effects and production design. And I said, besides winning the Academy Award for I think Thunderball, I may have that wrong, but he did it for one of them. And I said, is there anything else you've done that I would be aware of? And he said, yeah, there's this little film that I did the design of. It's called Star Wars.
Ah,
So the guy that basically did all the gadgets on the Aston Martin DB5 was pretty responsible for things like R2D2 and C3PO and those sorts of
that's
things as
cool.
well. So anyhow, but yeah, I really put my foot in it there.
I
But
mean that
Do
make
you have, sometimes we ask folks like, what's your favorite Bond film or do you favorite Bond actor? So I want to ask you, what's your favorite Q performance in any of the Bond films? Do you have a favorite Q sequence? Like when he's handing out the gadgets to Bond, is there one that really jumps out as your favorite?
that's a good question. 'Cause now I've got all these flashing through my mind, and I'd never thought about, I'd never been asked that question before, so it's hard to answer. But there's one, and I don't, where they're walking through the lab, and I know the person's in a wheelchair and has a cast on his leg, and the
uh,
cast ends up firing
yeah, that's
things, and there's a
golden.
lot of stuff going on in the background and all that. I think
Yeah.
that's probably my
That's mine too.
my favorite.
Yeah, it's GoldenEye. Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
yeah,
it's just like encapsulates like all that you want to see from Q and sight gags, and it's all done really well. And Pierce Brosnan just like effortlessly just like
Oh, yeah.
observes it. It's great.
right,
It
right.
was such a crowd. I still remember that scene when I first saw the movie in theaters. It was such a crowd-pleasing
Yeah,
moment when he showed up in the wheelchair and the audience just went bananas at every joke and gag, and it was like the
done.
showstopper.
Exactly, exactly.
There's this little scene where I don't know if it was improvised, but Bond just opens up some laptop and then just starts to like type randomly, and then Q's like stop that, and he just slams it, and you don't really know what Bond is actually like typing at that point,
Yeah.
Right, right,
but it's done really well. So,
right.
um, what's the rarest thing that you have?
Well, the rarest thing I have, I don't have anymore because
Oh,
I've already
done it.
donated it.
Yeah.
But I had the manuscript copy of the first short story at the time we thought was the first short story Fleming ever wrote when he was studying writing in Austria at
Mhm.
age 19. I
Oh,
had
wow.
a copy of that. So in the book, Talk of the Devil,
Mhm.
it's the first story in the book. A poor man escapes. And I say, until recently, we thought that was the first one, but it turns out that I think maybe it was John Gilbert that found it, but there's a story that he published in the Wyvern, the Wyvern in 1925 at Eton when he was a student at Eton, called The Ordeal of Carlisle St. George. And that's only been I don't obviously didn't own it, and they found it in an old Eton library and made a copy of it. And in one of the editions of one of the limited editions of Talk of the Devil, they inserted it in an envelope in the back as a, okay, now you've got the complete set of Fleming
Oh, okay,
stuff.
cool.
So,
I
but
see.
it was in fact, if you look at Talk of the Devil, I think it starts off, yeah, it says right up front that the manuscript resides in the Michael VanBlaricum collection of Ian Fleming and Bonnie Yen at the Rare Book and Manuscript Library at the University of Illinois. So
Nice.
it's kind of cool,
No, that is cool.
so anyhow, there are 5 different editions of this book, by the way.
Okay.
You know,
Oh,
this is the American. I
I
think
haven't
this is
gotten it yet. I have to get it. I haven't gotten
yeah,
it yet. Yeah, it looks cool. It looks really, really good.
right.
I've read some really fun things about it. So, um,
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you, what's the gold bust behind you there? If you could talk about that. So,
Sure. That is, well, obviously it's Fleming.
yeah.
But give me just a second to, oh, I already pulled it down.
Okay. There you go.
And
Yeah.
there it is. Um, John Pearson's Life of Ian Fleming.
Hmm.
They produced, well, that's sort of a really weird version of the gold bust.
Yeah.
It's an overlay of 2 pictures, but they put these gold busts in bookstore windows in London when this John Pearson's Life of Ian Fleming came out, and they're plaster of Paris, and fairly rare. I had two, I had this one, which is still intact,
Mhm.
and I had ordered another one that I found years ago. And when it came as a pile of pieces of plaster of Paris that were broken apart. And I had a collector who was an artist found out about it, that I had this broken version of that, and he bought it and put it back together, and it was gorgeous. Um, so anyhow, I think there were only 50 of those made, and there's probably at most a half dozen left.
Wow.
This one, I'm just trying to figure out how to transport it across the United States safely and get it to the library
Wow.
in Illinois. But that's what it
Okay.
is from that
That's pretty cool.
from publicity. And the other thing you can't see, there's a box back there. Um, you can see the open side of the box behind the globe.
Yeah, I
But
can see
that
that.
box, and I grab it, except it's full of shot glasses. Um, it says "From Russia with Love" on it, and apparently it looks like a ammunition box in some sense. And
Mhm.
apparently they use those in shop windows, bookstore windows in England when From Russia with Love came out.
Okay.
And I've never seen any, this is the only one of those I've ever seen.
Wow.
So, every once in a while you stumble across these really
Yeah.
weird stuff, and it takes a while to figure out why does this even exist?
So are you going to donate everything, or will you keep some items, or what do you intend to
Um,
donate?
I am keeping some things, but
Yeah.
they're and generally duplicates.
Okay.
And they're things that are you know inscribed to me.
Hmm.
I mean, not everything that's inscribed to me I'm keeping, but there are some things that are where I've got 2 signed copies, and
Hmm.
one's inscribed to me. I'll keep, but for the most part, in the long run, I want to get everything there
Hmm.
to the library. I think I've given them 1,600
Wow.
items as of right now. And as my wife says, I'm buying them faster than I can give them away. It turns out they keep publishing stuff. Every time you turn around, there's a new book
Oh yeah.
that comes out. And so, as a completist, I have to buy the book to make
Yeah.
sure that 200 years from now, if somebody goes into that library to study Fleming, they're going to see everything that was ever produced
Yeah.
related to that whole Fleming/Bond phenomena. This fall, I gave my whole Chitty Chitty Bang Bang collection to them. And that was, I think, 151 books.
Wow.
Um, it's amazing how many Chitty Chitty Bang Bang
A
books
lot of them.
there were uh, written, considering you only wrote one book or 3, depending how you count.
yeah.
Yeah, I know, right?
Uh, so
Um,
yeah, fun stuff.
well, where do you, okay, well, I have a two-part question. Where do you see the future of the Fleming Foundation, and where do you see the future of the Bond franchise right
Good
now?
question.
Okay.
Both the Fleming Foundation, when I stepped down, we had been in discussions, John Cork and I in particular, had been in discussions for several years about how can we make the foundation more Fleming oriented. Can we get enough money to be able to put up signs around the world that say, this is where Fleming went to school, or this is, as an 8-year-old, things like that. Doing more to promote Fleming as opposed to the movies. And I think once I stepped down, we brought in the board is pretty well set up to have a lot of people. There's a professor there, a retired professor, who used to teach classes in Fleming and Bond. His classes were really more on the history of the Bond movies and how they reflect society at the time. But so they're trying to get more into that, trying to do a lot more social media
Hmm.
things. And, so there's a new website,
Yeah.
and trying to get a lot more stuff on the website, those sorts of things. So I think that's the direction it's going. As far as Bond and the Bond franchise, I think we're all waiting with bated
Mhm.
breath to
Yeah.
see what happens. And because Amazon owns it, I think we're pretty certain that one, they're going to throw everything they've got at it to make sure it's a good film.
Hmm.
And so far they have. The producers and the director and everybody look like they're good people. Um, but it'll be interesting to see. It's going to be different than what Eon was doing, I'm pretty sure, but it's probably will still stay in the mold. And then the question is, will people take to it and continue on and to buy toys and gadgets and widgets and things like that? We'll just see. It's interesting from a Ian Fleming Publications perspective. If you watch, they're pushing really hard. I mean,
Hmm.
they've got all kinds of new, they've got the new Raymond Benson book out, they've got the new Q book out. They're still doing the Bond books that Kim Sherwood's got a new one coming out. So they're going all out from a literature side, which is great.
Hmm.
I think that's keeping Bond and Fleming alive everywhere. And I think it's just a matter now to see what happens with Amazon. It'll probably go start streaming really fast
Yeah.
on Prime Video, I suspect, and most likely there'll be spin-offs and things. We'll see.
What do you want from a Bond film? Like, what kind of tone would you like?
Well, personally, I would like to take it back into the Cold War.
Hmm.
I'd like to set these movies back in the 1950s
Hmm.
or even pre-Cold War, uh, in the era. But I was told once in no uncertain term when I suggested that it was either Michael Wilson or Barbara Broccoli. I said it would be great to do a period piece. And they said, well, period pieces don't sell. And I said, yeah, I could tell Indiana Jones didn't do well at all. And I didn't get invited to lunch after that. But but it's true. It'd be nice to see that done. I don't think they will.
Mhm.
They're going to try to keep contemporary. And it's interesting if you think about it. And I don't know if it's the last line of the last movie, but Bond, when the girl talks to her daughter,
Mhm.
Bond's daughter, and she said something to the effect that someday I'll tell you the whole story of who James Bond is. Now that's a setup if I ever saw one. Whether they're gonna, and that's probably where Eon would have gone with it, I would have thought,
Mm.
but whether Amazon will pick up on that or not and try to tell the historical background of Bond. Be really nice.
Yeah.
So anyhow, that's sort of my. I'm just sitting, waiting. I just hope I don't like bad mouthing things, but that show they did, I forget what it's called, the one where people running around trying to
Oh yeah.
TV show.
Yeah. Road to a million. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're going to have a show like that, let somebody win.
Yeah, yeah. That was my. Yeah, that's what I thought
Don't
too.
make them all losers. I
Yeah.
just, I thought that
I don't
was,
think anybody won either season.
Yeah, I don't think so.
yeah, yeah. It's like, come on, think this through, guys, before you do it.
I was surprised at that. I was like, so no one wins? I was like,
Sure.
what?
Yeah, it's just very strange, very strange. So we'll see what happens.
Fingers crossed. Steve, do you have anything else that you want to ask? Or
No, this has been a fantastic talk. I
yeah,
I've
it's great.
learned so much, and following the Ian Fleming Foundation on Instagram and seeing the posts in the news, you think oh, I know what these guys are about, and I did not know. It's it was just kind of like it was a surface knowledge, and now I have like a deeper
Yeah,
understanding
that's
of what the foundation does and what you set up and what you set out to achieve. And thank you
it's great.
for helping to keep Fleming alive, because as long as James Bond, of course, is the character, and we all love him and everything. But as long as I believe, as long as Fleming's spirit stays alive, Bond will continue to be relevant.
I think that's true. This is a sad fact, but um, I still, on occasion, when I tell people I collect uh, Bond books, every once in a while somebody, it's always an American, will say, "You mean there's books about the movies?"
Yeah,
Um, and it was interesting, and I'll tell one final story. I was
yeah.
in England. We were on a cruise, and we had come into the White Cliffs of Dover. And I wanted to go see Fleming's house because he had a house next door to Noel Coward in Dover, right below the White Cliffs. And so we get off the boat and we go to the cab drivers. And I figured, when I mentioned Fleming, a lot of times people over here, they don't necessarily know. And so but I figured everybody in Britain knows who Noel Coward is. And I said, we're looking for somebody to take us to Noel Coward's house. And after going through 2 or 3 cab drivers, they were finally gathering around us. They said, we don't know where that's at. And I said, well, what we really want to see is Ian Fleming's house. And they said, oh, we all know where that is. It's like, and I told the family, I met with the family very shortly after that. And I said, you guys are doing great on publicity because they didn't know where Noel Coward lived, but how they all knew where Ian Fleming lived. So I thought that was pretty cool.
I think they just sold that house, or it was for sale.
Yeah, I just saw it was up for sale.
Yeah, I read that. One last question. If you had to describe Fleming in one word, what would it be?
Fleming?
Yeah.
Creative.
Yeah. I can't argue with that.
Yeah.
100%.
Right.
All right. Well, Michael, this was a wonderful talk. Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining
Informative.
us.
Sure.
Thank
Enjoyed
you.
it.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Steve. Okay.
Cheers, everyone. Take care.
Take care, and thanks for doing this.
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
Bye. Bye.